This is a short talk on problems that evolved in the Republican government of ancient Rome around the 2nd century BCE. The system that was outlined in the last PowerPoint was, it works. There weren't many formal challenges to it. It didn't evolve enormously, and it seemed to be very robust until about the 2nd century BCE. Now, the 3rd century BCE was the period during which the war with Carthage dominated Roman politics and Roman life. And it's no surprise that as a result of this particular conflict, there were consequences. A lot of farmers who worked the land throughout the Italian peninsula naturally became rather fearful for their lives and their land when Hannibal and his army was marauding around the peninsula. So a lot of farmers simply abandoned their farms. In addition to that, this increased military action outside of Rome, either with Carthage or in Sicily or in Spain, that small group of the first provinces, those military actions took a lot of these small peasant farmers away from their farms, and not just for 2 or 3 months, for years on end. So these farms would be effectively abandoned. They would fall into disrepair. Possibly the owner was killed in action fighting for Rome. So what happened to these farms? Well, they were bought up mostly by large landowners. So there were fewer and fewer small farms in ordinary Romans, individuals farming a small plot of land for themselves and their families. And instead, we saw the growth of large-scale farming owned by the wealthiest people in society. And of course, after the wars, a lot of men didn't return to their farms, possibly because of the fear of a return to conflict with Carthage, but possibly because they simply wanted to move to the cities. They certainly might not have wanted to return to farms which were fallen into wreck and ruin. Anyway, conquest overseas for almost all ancient civilizations comes with a number of attendant prizes. Booty, coin, gold, precious metals, obviously. But just as significant and just as I want to say damaging, but I'm not sure that's entirely the right word, but of having just as significant a consequence, if not more, as an influx of money into a country after a successful warring campaign. A major prize in the ancient world would be enslaved people. This could be soldiers from the army that you were fighting. It could be citizens from the towns that you were laying siege to. But Rome was very successful throughout the 3rd century into the 2nd century BCE. All these places conquered, these new territories, these provinces set up, and what happened to the people they defeated? Well, of course, they enslaved them. These slaves would be taken back to Rome. And what happened then? Well, these increasingly large farms owned by wealthy aristocrats, members of the equites, the nobiles, who knows, wealthy people for sure. Well, they would put slaves to work on these farms. And if you had slaves working on these farms, why on earth would you pay to have citizens work on your farms? Employing slaves was far cheaper. Essentially, you needed to pay for their keep and their food, and that was it. You could literally, if you so chose, work them to death. So, with a huge influx of slaves, that meant a lot of people who previously had jobs, especially in farms, but also in the cities and in other industries, they were made unemployed. As people who owned these businesses put slaves to work in the place of citizens. So unemployment in ancient Rome becomes a bigger and bigger issue. So slavery, an influx, a mass influx of slaves, was really, really good for the wealthiest strata of society because they could save money from employing Roman citizens. But it was really, really dangerous for the poorest in society because if they had been a farmer, it was likely they had lost their farm, but now they couldn't even get working on a large farm that belonged to somebody, a wealthy person who conceivably had bought their farm. So it was really bad for the poorest in Rome. Now, these factors coalesced into really quite significant, dangerous social unrest. Because, as is true in many societies, as is probably true in our own society, unemployed people will gravitate towards the place where they think there is the most work. And the place where there is likely to be the most work is the place where there are the most businesses. So obviously a lot of people who had worked in the countryside on their farms, when they were unemployed, they gravitated towards Rome. And Rome started to fill up with this huge tranche of citizens who had been made unemployed. In addition to that, fewer Roman farmers. You remember from a previous presentation, the Roman army was made up of Roman citizens who would work on a farm, put down the plough, join the Roman army for a particular conquest, and then return to their farm. But if there aren't as many farms, if all the small farms have been bought up by large landowners, that means there are fewer soldiers for the Roman army. To the extent that eventually Rome is significantly filled. I'm using that word significantly a lot. I can't help it because a lot of this is significant. But the Roman army is increasingly filled with non-Romans. They might be allies or people from the Italian peninsula, but they were not Romans and they did not have Roman citizenship. And I would direct you to the Wikipedia page on Roman citizenship because being a Roman citizen gave you a number of rights which made your life better, from being allowed to stand for public office, which I take it not everybody would like, but it gave you, for example, the opportunity to buy grain and bread at a lower price than other people. So there were real practical, hands-on benefits to being a Roman citizen. Taxation was less stringent for Roman citizens compared to non-citizens. So you have a situation where the Roman army is filling up with non-Romans fighting for Rome, but not actually having the benefits of Roman citizens. You can easily understand how these people would start to get a bit cross. The last line of the slide there really sums up all of the issues. There were fewer farms, so there were fewer Roman soldiers. Rome began to be overpopulated by unemployed people. The allies were dissatisfied because they were fighting in the Roman army without actually receiving the benefits of being Roman citizens. And there was a growing gap between the richest and the poorest. So that when we get to the 1st century BCE, which is where a lot of our material picks up, Rome is a civilization in crisis. This is the skinny. You can pause the video and take these notes as usual. If you want to write more, you will perform better in the exam. So, do that. Any questions, see me in class, or don't see me in class.